The desert did not warn her. It never did. It held its breath the way it always had, quiet, endless, and watching as though it knew something the living did not. The sun had already bled itself into the horizon when the riders came. She remembered the sound first, not the thunder of hooves, but the silence that followed them. A stillness so unnatural, it made the wind seem like a distant memory. The small settlement, fragile as dry twigs, had no walls strong enough to hold back what approached from the dark. Her name had once been spoken with warmth, with laughter that echoed between wooden walls. That night it was swallowed. They did not speak when they arrived, faces painted with purpose, not rage. There was no chaos in their movement, only a quiet certainty, as if they had already seen how this night would end long before it began. She ran, but not far. A hand, firm but not cruel, caught her before the desert could. She struggled, not because she believed she could escape, but because fear demanded it. The man who held her did not strike her. He did not shout. He simply held on, like someone retrieving something already lost. In his eyes there was no triumph, only something older, something heavier. The village behind her faded into smoke and echoes. She did not turn back. Some part of her knew that looking would make it real, and she was not yet ready to carry that truth. They placed her upon a horse. The warrior who had taken her mounted behind, his presence steady, unyielding. As they rode into the vast, indifferent night, she felt the world she knew fall away piece by piece. The stars above stretched wide and endless, indifferent witnesses to all that was taken and all that would be forgotten. She hated him, or at least she told herself she did. But as the cold desert wind wrapped around them both, and his grip steadied her against the violent rhythm of the ride, something unsettled stirred beneath her fear, a question she did not yet understand. Why had he not let her fall? The desert offered no answer, only silence stretching on forever. Morning came slowly, like a wound reopening. She woke beneath a sky so wide it felt like it might swallow her whole. The camp was quiet, too. Quiet for a place filled with men who had taken everything from her. They moved like shadows, efficient and wordless. No one laughed, no one boasted. Even their fires burned low, as though noise itself was unwelcome here. And him, the one who had taken her, stood apart. He did not approach her immediately. He watched, but not like a captor watching a prisoner. There was distance in him, a restraint that did not match the violence of the night before. When he finally stepped closer, she braced herself. But he did not touch her. He placed a small piece of bread and a cup of water before her, then stepped back again. No words, no commands. It angered her more than cruelty would have. "Why?" she wanted to demand. "Why take me if you will not even claim your victory?" But he offered no explanation. Days passed like this, measured not by time, but by silence. She learned the rhythm of their world without being taught. When they moved, she moved. When they stopped, she stayed. And always he was there, not close, not distant, watching without watching. The others spoke to him rarely, and when they did, their voices carried something like respect, but also something heavier, something like grief. She began to notice the scars, not the ones carved into his skin, but the ones hidden in the way he held himself. The way he looked at the horizon as if it owed him something it could never return. He did not belong to the violence she had seen. Or perhaps he did, but he carried it differently. One evening, as the sky dimmed into deep blue, she stumbled while walking. Her strength had been thinning quietly, unnoticed even by herself. Before she could fall, he caught her again. The same steady grip, the same refusal to let her hit the ground. For a moment their eyes met. And in that moment she saw it clearly, not anger, not possession, not even guilt, but sorrow. A sorrow so deep it felt like it had no beginning. He released her quickly, as if the contact itself had been a mistake. And she realized something that unsettled her more than fear ever had. She did not understand him, and that frightened her far more than the night she was taken. The desert taught her patience the way it taught everything else. Slowly, without mercy. Days stretched into something shapeless. The sun carved its path across the sky, and the nights followed, cold and endless. Time no longer felt like something that moved forward. It simply existed like the land itself, and still he did not speak. She began to wonder if he ever would. Others spoke around him, short, measured words exchanged in low voices, but he remained untouched by their conversations. He answered when necessary, but never more than he had to. It was not silence born of ignorance. It was silence chosen. One evening she found him alone, seated at the edge of the camp where the desert began to dissolve into darkness. He was staring at something far beyond what the eye could see. She approached without thinking. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was something else she could not yet name. "You could have left me," she said, her voice fragile against the vast quiet. He did not turn. "You could have let me fall." Still no answer. The wind shifted between them, carrying the faint scent of dust and something older, something that felt like memory. Finally he spoke. "You were not meant to fall." His voice was low, steady, not harsh, not gentle. Simply certain. It was the first time she had heard it, and it unsettled her more than his silence ever had. "Not meant to," she repeated. "By who?" He did not answer that. Instead, he stood, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "There are things," he said quietly, "that do not belong to us to decide." She did not understand, but something in the way he said it made her feel as though he was not speaking only of her, as though he carried something unseen, that shaped every step he took. He left her there, alone with the stars rising slowly above. And for the first time since she had been taken, she did not feel only anger. She felt something else. Something quieter, something dangerous. The beginning of understanding. There are acts of kindness that arrive loudly, demanding to be seen. And then there are those that slip quietly into the world, as if they were never meant to exist at all. His belonged to the second kind. It began with small things. A blanket placed near her before the cold could reach her. Water offered before she had to ask. A slower pace when her steps grew heavy, though no one else seemed to notice. He never acknowledged these gestures, and she never thanked him. But the silence between them began to change. It no longer felt empty. It felt shared. One afternoon, as the heat pressed heavily upon the land, she faltered again. This time she did not hide it. There was no strength left for pride. He noticed. Of course he did. Without a word, he guided her toward the shade of a lone, twisted tree. It was the only thing in sight that offered any mercy from the sun. She sat, her breath uneven. He knelt beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the quiet steadiness of his presence. "Why?" she asked again, her voice softer now. This time he did not pretend not to hear. "Because I remember," he said. The words lingered between them. "Remember what?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, almost as if the words were being pulled from somewhere, deep and unwilling, he answered, "What it is to lose everything, and still be left alive." She did not know what to say. There are truths that do not ask for understanding. They simply exist. And in that moment, she saw him not as the man who had taken her, but as someone who had once been broken in a way that could not be undone. The desert stretched endlessly around them. But for the first time, it did not feel entirely empty, because in the silence between them, something fragile had begun to grow. Not trust, not yet, but something that might one day become it, if the desert allowed it, if time did not take it away first. Fire, in that land, was never just warmth. It was memory. Each night, as the flames rose and bent beneath the whisper of the wind, they carried stories no one dared to speak aloud. Stories etched into the faces gathered around them, into the lines of men who had seen too much and buried even more. She began to notice how he watched the fire, not as others did, not for comfort, nor for its light. He watched it like one watches something that has already taken everything once before. That night, the air carried a heaviness that felt older than the land itself. The others had withdrawn early, their voices fading into sleep, leaving only the crackle of flame and the endless stretch of stars. She sat across from him, the distance between them no longer as vast as it had once been. "You lost someone," she said quietly. It was not a question. He did not look at her. "Yes." The answer came easily, too easily. The fire shifted, casting shadows that moved like ghosts across his face. For a moment, it seemed as though those shadows belonged to something else, entirely, something not bound to the man sitting before her. "Who?" she asked. The silence that followed was different this time, not avoidance. "But wait. My family," he said at last. "My son." The word lingered, fragile and sharp. She felt it before she understood it. There are losses that break a man, and then there are losses that hollow him out, leaving something behind that still walks, still breathes, but is no longer whole. "How?" she whispered. He closed his eyes briefly, as though the answer lived somewhere behind them. "Fire," he said. The same fire that now danced harmlessly between them. The same fire he watched, as though it might rise up and take everything again. "They came in the night," he continued, his voice steady but distant. "Not unlike we did." The word struck her harder than anything he had said before. For the first time she saw it clearly. He was not separate from what had happened to her. He was part of it, and yet he was also something else. "I was not there," he added almost to himself. "I returned to ashes, to silence." The desert wind moved softly through the camp, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke that may not have even been real. "I could not save them." It was not regret that filled his voice. It was something quieter, something deeper, acceptance of a wound that would never close. She looked at him then, not as a captor, not even as a stranger, but as someone who had once stood where she now stood, on the edge of everything lost. The fire between them flickered, and for a brief, fragile moment it no longer felt like something that destroyed, but something that remembered. And in its glow, the distance between them seemed to shrink, not because the past had changed, but because they had both begun to see it for what it truly was, a shared silence shaped by loss. On some days the sky refuses to be kind. That was one of them. The heat arrived early, pressing down on the earth like a heavy weight. The wind retreated, leaving the world still and silent. They traveled longer than usual. There was urgency in the movement, unspoken but noticeable. She could see it, in the others' glances toward the horizon more often, in their tension, in the horses moving uneasily. In him, he was closer now, his presence a quiet protection. It felt unsettling, because it meant something was coming. By midday, the sky turned white, a kind of sky that erases depth and distances. They saw it, dust rising from the horizon, barely a disturbances against the sky. It grew fast. Quickly, too quickly. The others noticed too, without panic or hesitation. They gave sharp, efficient orders, shifting direction toward a rocky cluster that seemed like a broken tooth from the earth. "Do you know what's happening?" she asked, her voice tight. His reaction was immediate, without hesitation. He said, "Men, not our men." Despite the words, she understood. Retribution or something worse. They reached the rocks as the wind returned, fierce and relentless, carrying sand and uncertainty with it. He guided her down from the horse, his movements swift yet controlled. "Stay close," he said simply. Not a command, only concern. The others prepared in silence, their movements precise and focused. Weapons drawn, positions taken. The air thickened with something like the edge of a blade. Before she knew it, the storm, sand and uncertainty, came like a swarm through the air. She could not see clearly, only fragments. Movement, shout lost to the storm, and him always near, always between her and whatever threatened to reach her. When the storm ended, it seemed abrupt. The wind retreating as though nothing had happened. The riders were gone. More of the men were gone. The desert regained its silence. She stood there, her breath uneven, her hand still in his. He did not release it automatically, as though letting go too soon might allow something unseen to take her. When he finally did, the absence of his grip was colder than the storm. The sky above remained pale, indifferent. But something had changed, not in the land, not in the world, but between them. Because in the midst of chaos, he chose not to let her disappear. And she did not pull away. The desert had witnessed it, and it would not forget. After the storm, the world felt altered, not visibly. The desert remained as it always had, vast, unyielding, and indifferent to the lives that passed through it. But something beneath its surface had shifted. like a breath taken and held too long. They did not speak of what had happened. Not him, not her. Some things once lived do not require words. That night the camp was smaller, quieter. The absence of those who had not returned lingered like a shadow no fire could chase away. The others moved with a heaviness that needed no explanation. Loss was not new to them, but it was never light. She found herself sitting closer to him now, though neither had made a decision to close that distance. It had simply happened, as naturally as dusk turning into night. The stars above seemed sharper than before, as though the storm had stripped something from the sky itself. "Why did you hold on to me?" she asked suddenly. The question slipped out before she could stop it. He did not look at her. "You would have been lost." It was a simple answer. Too simple. "So would you," she said. This time he turned. Their eyes met, and for a moment there was no desert. No camp, no past, only that quiet space where truth lingers unguarded. "I have been lost before," he said. The words carried no bitterness, only certainty. "And you found your way back?" He held her gaze for a long moment. No. The honesty in it struck deeper than any comfort could have. "Then why keep going?" she asked. The fire cracked softly between them. He looked away, his gaze drifting upward toward the endless scatter of stars. "Because stopping would mean they are truly gone." She followed his gaze. The stars did not answer, but they seemed to listen. There was something in his words that settled into her, a realization she had not wanted to face, that survival was not always strength. Sometimes it was simply refusal. Refusal to let the past disappear completely. Refusal to let the ones lost fade into nothing. She thought of her own life before the desert, of the voices that had once filled it, of the silence that had replaced them. And for the first time, she understood something she had been resisting. He was not the reason her world had been taken. He was just another soul walking through its ruins. The fire dimmed slowly, the night deepening around them. Neither spoke again, but the silence was no longer empty. It was shared, and in that quiet space between heartbeats, something fragile took root. Not love, not yet, but something that could no longer be undone. Something the desert had seen before, and always eventually taken or tested. Not all places forget. Some hold on. They carry the weight of what once was, even when the world has moved on without them. They reach the river at dawn, or what remained of it. A thin, winding thread of water cutting through the earth, its edges cracked and dry, as though it had been slowly fading for years. "This place," she whispered. He nodded. It was once full. The way he said it made it sound like more than just water had been lost. They stopped there, the group dispersing quietly to rest, to drink, to gather what little the land still offered. She walked along the river's edge, her steps slow, careful. There were traces of something here, not visible, but felt, like echoes beneath the surface. He joined her after a while, his presence no longer surprising. "Is this where—" she began. He understood before she finished. "Yes." The words settled heavily. She looked at him, then at the river. It was difficult to imagine it as anything more than what it was now, small, quiet, almost forgotten. But in his eyes she saw it differently, as something that had once been alive, full, taken. "I used to bring him here," he said. His voice was softer than she had ever heard it. He would run along the water, laugh. The image felt almost impossible. This man, who carried silence like a second skin, speaking of laughter. He was not afraid of anything, he added. There was a faint smile there, fleeting. Gone as quickly as it came. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. Some memories are not meant to be shared fully, only acknowledged. "I thought—" he began, then stopped. She waited. "I thought I could keep him safe." The river moved quietly beside them, indifferent, unchanged. "You could not have known," she said gently. He shook his head. "No," he said, "but I should have been there." The weight of those words settled into the air between them, not as blame, but as something heavier, something that would never leave him. She stepped closer then, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because something within her had shifted beyond return. "You are here now," she said. He looked at her. And for a moment, something in his expression changed. Not sorrow, not guilt, but something softer. Something that had no place in a world like this. The river whispered quietly beside them, a remnant of what had been, a reminder of what could never be again. And yet, it still flowed, however faint, however broken. It endured. As they stood there side by side, she realized something she had not expected to feel. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. Something that did not erase the past, but allowed something new to exist beside it. And in the quiet presence of a dying river, beneath a sky that had seen too much and remembered too little, they stood not as captor and captive, but as two souls shaped by loss, learning slowly what it meant to remain. There are nights when the wind does not wander. It searches. That evening it came low and restless, slipping through the camp like something alive, brushing against skin and firelight with quiet insistence. The others felt it too, though none spoke of it. They only tightened their movements, their glances turning outward toward the edges of darkness. She sat near the dying embers, her thoughts caught between what had been and what had begun to change. The desert had a way of pulling memory from the deepest places, as though it fed on what people tried to forget. And that night it found her. Her name came first. Soft, almost lost in the wind, but unmistakable. She froze. It had not been spoken here, not since the night everything had been taken, and yet she heard it again, carried faintly across the open land, as though the past itself had found a voice. He noticed. Of course he did. His head turned sharply, his posture shifting from stillness to alertness in a single breath. "What is it?" he asked. "My name," she whispered.
"Someone called my name."
The wind moved again, stronger now, circling through the camp like a question unanswered. The others began to stir, sensing something they could not see. He stepped closer to her, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. "No one is there," he said, but his voice held doubt. A name, spoken not with fear, but with familiarity. A voice she had once known. Her breath caught. "It cannot be," she murmured. Without thinking, she moved, stepping beyond the safety of the fire, into the reach of shadow. He followed immediately, his hand catching her arm, not harshly, but firmly. "Do not go," he said. "It's him," she insisted.
"I know that voice."
The wind surged between them, carrying the sound once more, closer now, closer than it should have been. Something shifted in his expression then. Not fear, but recognition. "This is not a voice of the living," he said quietly. She pulled away from him. "You do not know that." But even as she said it, doubt crept in, because the voice did not call again. No footsteps, no figure emerging from the dark. Nothing, only the echo of what had been heard or imagined. She stood there, her heart unsteady, her certainty unraveling. He remained beside her, his presence unwavering. "The desert remembers," he said, "but it does not return what is lost." The words settled heavily. She wanted to argue, to deny, but something deep within her understood. Not everything that calls to us is meant to be followed. They returned to the fire without speaking, and though the night passed without further disturbance, something had changed, because for the first time she realized that the past was not behind her. It walked beside her, whispered to her, and if she was not careful, it might lead her somewhere she could never return from. Morning arrived without softness, the kind of morning that does not ease into the world but forces it awake. There was tension in the camp, quiet, unspoken, but unmistakable. He felt it before it was said. The others gathered, their voices low but firm, their glances shifting between him and her. She did not understand the words, but she understood the weight behind them. This was about her. One of the older men stepped forward, his gaze steady, unyielding. There was no anger in it. There are moments when the world does not end with noise, but with stillness. This was one of them. She stood at the edge of the camp, the others already preparing to leave. Their movements were deliberate, unhurried, yet there was finality in every step. No one looked at her now. The decision had been made, and whatever followed no longer concerned them. The path back lay open, clear, certain, but it felt like a road that no longer belonged to her. He stood a short distance away, not approaching, not leaving, waiting. The space between them held everything that had been said and everything that had not. "You should go," he said quietly. The words carried no force, only truth. She did not move. "And you should not have taken me," she replied. There was no bitterness in it, only something softer, something that had taken root without permission. He almost smiled. Almost. "And yet I did." The desert wind moved gently between them, no longer restless, no longer searching, just present, like time itself. "If I go back," she said slowly, "I will remember this." He nodded. "And if you stay?" She held his gaze. "I will still remember." There was no escaping it, no returning to what had been, only forward, only consequence. The others mounted their horses, their silhouettes already turning toward the horizon. They would not wait. He knew that. She knew that. This moment existed outside of them, outside of everything. "I do not know what this becomes," he said. It was the closest he had come to uncertainty. She stepped closer. Neither of them flinched. "It does not need to become anything," she said. "It already is." The truth of it settled between them. Simple, unavoidable. The last of the riders began to move, their figures growing smaller against the vast stretch of land. The world was choosing its direction, and still she did not move. Neither did he. The sky above remained endless, indifferent to what unfolded beneath it. But for a moment, just a moment, it felt as though it was watching, waiting to see what two broken souls would choose. Not for survival, not for duty, but for something far more fragile. Something that had no place in a world like this, and yet existed anyway. The desert does not hold everything. It lets most things fade, footsteps, voices, even the memory of those who once crossed its endless skin. But some things it keeps. No one spoke of what happened after. There were no stories carried back, no whispers passed between settlements, only silence, the kind that settles over something too fragile to be touched. Some say she returned, that she walked the long path back to a life that no longer felt like her own, carrying with her a quiet she could never explain. Others say she stayed, that she chose the unknown over the familiar, stepping fully into a world that had once been forced upon her, and finding something there she had not expected. But the desert offers no answers, only traces. A place near a dying river where footprints once lingered longer than they should have. A fire pit, long abandoned where the ashes seem untouched by time. And sometimes, on nights when the wind moves just right, a feeling. Not a sound, not a voice, but something that brushes softly against the edge of memory, as though two lives once set against each other by force had found a moment beneath the stars where the world did not matter, where loss did not erase what remained, where something quiet, something impossible, was allowed to exist. He is not remembered as a warrior, not in the way others are. There are no stories of his battles, no songs of his victories, only a silence where his name should be, and perhaps that is how it was meant to be. Because some lives are not meant to be told loudly. They are meant to be felt, in the spaces between words, in the weight of what is not said. As for her, there are those who claim that in certain light, a figure can be seen walking along the edge of the desert, never fully arriving, never fully leaving. Not lost, not found, just moving, and above her always the same endless sky. The same stars that once bore witness to a night that should have been only sorrow, but became something else, something quieter, something that did not ask to be understood, only remembered. The desert keeps its secrets well, but every now and then it lets one slip through, not as a story, but as a feeling, and those who feel it rarely speak of it, because they know some things are too sacred for words.